Welcome everyone to the next CDS Data Science Under the Hood seminar. So for those that don't know me, my name is Chris Trivandi and I'm one of the program directors in the centre. So it's a real pleasure today to introduce our speaker, who is Laith Alzubaidi. And Laith is currently a postdoctoral researcher in the School of Mechanical, Medical and Process Engineering at QUT. And he also did his PhD at QUT, and he completed that this year. So prior to that, he completed a master's degree in computer science at the University of Missouri. And Laith has published many papers in the area of deep learning, specifically quite a few papers with application to medical imaging. And it's exactly this topic that Laith is going to talk to us today about. So now I'm going to hand it over to Laith, who's going to present. So how long will your presentation roughly be, Laith?
Like 45 minutes.
Yeah, sure, that's great. So Laith will talk for around 45 minutes, and then after that, there'll be some time for questions. And also, if you have any questions as you go along, please don't hesitate to type them into the chat window or the Q&A window, and then we can address those questions at the end. So I'll just hand it over to you now, Laith.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for having me today. Today, I thought it's a really good opportunity to talk about deep learning for medical imaging applications. As Chris mentioned, I spent like the master's degree and PhD working on this type of applications. And during this presentation, I will take you through some of the concepts, some of the challenges, and solutions to that challenges and the problems, and some of the ideas to think about, like robustness, efficiency, like effectiveness, even explanation of the black box of deep learning. So I will take you through the introduction, background, challenge one, challenge two. I will discuss two challenges indeed in this presentation: the network architecture and lack of training data. There are several challenges in deep learning, but these are the most common ones. And these are really related to the performance of deep learning algorithms. Then we will take the conclusion and future work. So with the traditional clinical procedure, usually we have the three steps. The first one is diagnosis, where we care what happened to the patient. And the second one is prognosis, what we care about what will happen to the patient. And the treatment, where the clinicians and the specialist wants to know what will give to the patients. With deep learning models have shown, deep learning has shown a good performance on three of these steps, medical steps. And for example, imagine the machine will be responsible for interpretation of medical imaging for the prognosis, like predicting the mortality from the healthcare and predicting the treatment effect on individual patients. Mainly, I focus on diagnosis. That's the step where we care about and what happened to the patient. So for diagnosis testing, there is like pathology test, like lab test, anatomy, and radiology test. So for example, with lab test, there is a blood and urine samples. With anatomy, like tissue or cells. With radiology, there is an image technologies like an X-ray, CT, MRI. Deep learning has shown a great performance on all of these like type of tests. For example, on blood, like detecting from the histology images, like the breast cancer or sickle cell anemia, from tissues and cells as well. From the imaging technologies like an X-ray, COVID, CT, like brain tumor, MRI, like also brain tumor and strokes, different type of diseases. So deep learning can deal with different type of images, different type of diseases. So one of the good examples of deep learning is ImageNet classification. This is one of the famous data set that deep learning models worked on. So just like a comparison between the performance of these models, like these are the models of of deep learning starting to compete for that data set. And at a certain point, deep learning, the ResNet model, showed a performance even better than a human, which motivated people to start think about how to develop these type of algorithms in order to have a good performance. So this data set currently almost 14 million images. So deep learning can deal with that huge number of images. So now the question is, what is deep learning? Deep learning basically, the big umbrella is AI, artificial intelligence. Machine learning is part of an AI, and then deep learning comes under the branch of machine learning. So it's a branch of machine learning. This algorithm is basically a graph of multiple processing layers, several layers that these layers have filters to extract the features from the input image, then feed these features to the classifiers in order to do the task, whether like classification or detection or so on. The good thing about these algorithms are good to deal with the complex and large data sets. And these systems of deep learning help in terms of giving a second opinion to the doctors, like having like two opinions on a task or on a case is better than having one opinion. So these algorithms help in terms of reducing the cost, the time of the diagnosis. So one of the main questions that I usually receive, what is the difference between machine learning and deep learning? So imagine the scenario when we have for the long time machine learning, the traditional procedure is there is an input image, and then there is a guy who is responsible to extract features. What do I mean by features? Features means that that person will go, for example, in case of medical images, to the specialist and tell them, hey, what's make difference about this image? Where do you look? What's important about that image in order to make the decision? For example, say the shape or the textures or the size or the color. And then based on that, that person will extract the features, will design a filter on top of the image to extract the feature based on what he was told, and then extract the feature and feed that features to classification to learn from that feature to do the output. So one of the problems of that, so the performance will be based on that feature extraction. So it could be not the right features to discriminate between classes. It could be biased to something. So that performance could be even like not having a good ability to deal with large amount of data, different scenarios, like complex data in order to extract all relevant features in order to do the classifications. So later on, deep learning came and showed that ability to do both of these feature extraction and the classification in one shot, like just doing the classification, automatically doing the feature extraction and the classification at the same time without designing any algorithm for feature extraction. So deep learning learns the features automatically and can deal with the several tasks, million of images, just like we saw for ImageNet dataset. So showing a really huge ability to deal with the classification, for example. But the problem again with deep learning requires large amount of data in order to learn from that input data. So for the reasons that just this deep learning appeared and starting to take the role of doing many tasks, currently high availability of medical data, starting the data to increase and showing huge amount of data around the world. Development of complex algorithms. These algorithms and deep learning starting to develop and getting really good in a way how to deal with the medical data. And also, I personally believe because of the high computational tools that we have currently to train these algorithms. So for very long time, machine learning algorithms were the dominant one. They were the good ones until they got to a point they are not able to deal with the very complex data and large amount of data. So deep learning is able to do that and to handle these the complexity along with the computational tools in order, like, for example, GPUs, TPUs, and so on. So some of the examples of that, deep learning applications, continuous monitoring of health, for example, arrhythmia detection, one of the good examples, like monitoring millions of people around the world affected by that, can just reduce the cost. And the most important, can just predict what will happen to the people with that problem, and tell them exactly, like, for example, based on the record and the heartbeats, then they are able to predict something and save lives. Another example is COVID detection. Several examples, like algorithms worked based on X-ray images to detect whether there is a COVID or not. And even they used a cell phone application to record to classify the COVID versus non-COVID based on recorded coughs. So by just using the application to do that, which is really great. Another example is microscopic breast cancer detection. Deep learning is showing great performance on that applications. Breast cancer detection as well at the very early stage. Deep learning showed a huge performance on that by just detecting the breast cancer from very early stage based on the radiology images. Another example is DFU, diabetic foot ulcer, classifying whether it's normal or abnormal based on the input image of that foot, and telling whether there is a problem or not, or there is maybe a DFU or not, compared to the wound or different type of injuries in the foot. So showing these are what we learned from that. It's like the deep learning can really show huge performance on medical images. Before we dive in the details, I would very quickly give introduction. Maybe we can answer the questions later on when we finish. So the background, I would start by giving very quick background about the machine learning in general. So in order deep learning and machine learning in general, in order to deal with these algorithms, we need to first figure out which way we are dealing with or which path we should go with. So there is supervised learning, whether you want to do classification, for example, diagnosis, image classification, different applications where we have the label, like there is an input image and there is an output, a label that matches with that input image. For example, I have an image of MRI, then definitely, for example, I have the normal and abnormal labels. With the regression as well, like we predict, for example, weather forecasting, market forecasting as well, and different applications where we predict based on the data that we have. And supervised learning, like we don't have the label, but for example, of clustering, dimensional reduction, there is reinforcement learning, and there's other type of learning. So before we go ahead and start these algorithms, we need to know which type of data, which type of a problem that we're dealing with. Also, for example, we decided to work on supervised learning. For example, computer vision task. Do we need to do, like, think about, you want to do the classification task or semantic segmentation object detection, on instance segmentation. So based on that, whatever that you will work on, for example, for medical images, you need to think about how to prepare your data for that task. For example, with the classification, we just say what is in that image, like what type of object in that image. For example, the cat, we say there is a cat. So I already prepared the classification by having the image and the label of each of these images to train the deep learning model. For segmentation, for example, I have the mask for that. So I need to feed the neural network with the mask and the original images. With the object detection, for example, I have the object and the boundary box for single images, like images that I have in order to train the deep learning models. And with the same thing with instance segmentation, when I have the mask for the object in the image. So again, based on the task that you will work on, then definitely you need to prepare data based on the task. So as you see here. Again, if you decide for classification, there are specific application, algorithms, deep learning algorithms for classification. For example, convolutional neural network. This is one of the most popular one for deep learning algorithms or models. If you decide segmentation, for example, maybe you can use UNIT and other application or other algorithms, or maybe you build your own algorithm or model. Maybe for a prediction, there is long short-term memory to use. The purpose of mentioning that is to show that based on the task you will work on, you will decide which direction and which way you will work on, which type of algorithms you need to look for. So the general mechanism of any deep learning model is based on you first design your own network, or you use some of the existing models like AlexNet, VGG, ResNet, GoogleNet, maybe TensorFlow, PyTorch, any library to import these models. You may design your own model, and then you go through the training first, and you divide the data set based on training and testing and validation as well. We'll explain that later on. And then you optimize, you pick the training parameters, optimizers, like learning rate, epochs, iterations, all this type of setup in order to train the deep learning, optimize it. If you get a good performance, then you move on. If not, you go back and you modify the design and do the training again. That's kind of the procedure, the whole mechanism of any deep learning model. So, very quick example, another example of classification. For example, we have an image of an satellite, RGB satellite, whether it's in school or not school. For example, with the object detection, where we detect some, for example, the boundary box, the airplane with the one engine or two engines, where we have another image where we say this blue area is a water, and this light green is a field, or dark green is a tree, and so on. So it's kind of specifying the area of this application. I'm trying to show several examples, not just only medical images. So based on the literature, one of the good examples of good algorithms and deep learning is popular because of this algorithm, which is convolutional neural network. This algorithm is mainly used for classification, different applications of medical images. So previously, this algorithm is based on there is an input image. We'll go through several layers in order to extract the features. And one of the features called convolutional feature layer that is responsible for extracting the features. There is several parameters in that layer, in that algorithm, sorry, the depth, the stride, and the padding. Could be zero padding or not. And there is another layer which called, so that convolution layer has a filter will go through the image in order to get the feature, extract the feature. Then there is another layer called pooling layer, where starting to reduce the dimensionality of the input image. The purpose is to get one array, like to pass it to the fully connected with each of these arrays will represent one of the input images to train these fully connected layers and come up with the probability of the classes that will classify. And we'll see different examples. Several types of that pooling layer, for example, average pooling, maximum pooling. There is even global average pooling. There is a global maximum pooling. There are several details with these algorithms. I'm just going through these very quick. If you want to look more, maybe in the future to have more details about that in different webinar. One of the good examples, again, is to reduce the dimensionality and dealing with even overfitting is global average pooling, where take the whole image and reduce it in one single bit. Another component of that CNN is batch normalization, where we normalize the input channel through minimum batch. This kind of layers helps in terms of speeding up the CNN training process and even helps in avoiding gradient vanishing problem. And we will talk about this problem later on. Another type is activation functions like tan-h, rectifier linear unit, sigmoid, and one of the good ones is rectifier linear unit, which helps in order to avoid also gradient vanishing problem. There is another type of layers called dropout layers, where the neurons are randomly turned on and off in order to avoid overfitting. So, based on the review that we have done in this paper of review deep learning concepts, CNN architectures and challenges, applications, future direction, we came up with the conclusion of we can conclude the problem of deep learning in 3 different ways. The first one is based on the structures which are the overfitting, gradient vanishing issue, and feature extraction and presentations. The second part is the lack of training data for medical images. And the third one is how to deal with different characteristics of the data, how to deal with the robustness and generalization, how to set up the training options, like which type of optimizers to use, or which type of learning or activation function to use. So that can lead us to 2 main open research questions. The first one, how to design the deep learning architecture that can deal with these problems of feature extraction, good feature extraction, overfitting, vanishing gradient problem, and so on for medical images. And how to deal with the lack of training data, how to come up with a good model that trained well on large amount of data, while it's really hard for medical applications to get a large amount of data. So we'll go through the first challenge or the first research question very quick. The main problem with that is how to design a deep learning model. Do I need to have a shallow model? Do I need to have very deep model? Personally, I believe it's based on the data that you have, because having very deep model will lead to a problem of overfitting. Definitely, if the data is a small amount of, if you have a small amount of data, then you need to think about the depth. However, if you have large amount of data with the very complex, definitely more layers in order to learn more about these images, extract more features to do. Traditionally, many algorithms and models use just they call it plane or one dimension model, like layer following each layer. There's a multiple layers that follow each other. The problem with that will lead to, for example, having one filter size, like having one filter size. If you go with the small amount or small size of filter size, like 1 by 1, then that means you will extract the small features and ignore the large features, or the shapes will give like a narrow point of view. However, if you go with the big one, then you ignore the network will ignore the small ones. One of the good techniques to deal with that, they call it parallel convolution. As you see here, several models recently like GoogleNet, Exception, all these type of models were designed based on parallel processing, where there is several layers that work together with a different filter size, like starting 1 by 1 and 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 7 by 7, then so on, and then combine all of that in one layer, and then feed it to the next block in order to do the same procedure, which this technique helps in a way that can extract different level of features, like different types of features, and at the same time help with the gradient propagation, as the gradient will just use several paths in order to maintain that gradient. Another problem is overfitting. Overfitting means that the model learned the data very well. Usually, this problem will occur when we have small amount of training. Like the model, usually, this is one of the biggest problem that I ever witnessed with many people who work with deep learning, by just thinking you have a small data set, you tested that model, oh, I got 99% accuracy, and I'm good to go. Then when you move on to the real world and test your model on different data for the same task, you will get surprised that the model showing a really bad performance on that. That means the model learned the specific data only for that data and is not able to classify other type, like different data. So how to deal with the problem? There's different directions. The first one, from the design's point of view, by using like pooling layer or dropout layer, patch normalizations, all of these three help in terms of overfitting. Another problem, another solution, sorry, is to increase the data set in order to deal with that problem, and having several scenarios in order to deal with that. For example, data augmentation, using there are several types of data augmentation, or transfer learning, GAN to generate more data. Cross-validation can help in this problem also, to get rid of that. And this is example of showing where to use the with and without dropout layer, how the error just got reduced by using the dropout layer. Another problem is gradient vanishing problem, where there is a sigmoid, tan edge, rectifier linear unit, and Likert, and there are other types of activation functions. So the problem of that means that the gradient will vanish by time of learning, by just passing from layer to the layer. The problem is with sigmoid and tan edge, these two layers just squeeze the gradient, the weights from 1 to -1, 0, and 1. So the problem will not occur when you have a shallow model, like few layers, because there is no way to squeeze. However, when you go with the deep models, these activation functions will keep squeezing the gradient until it vanishes. There is no learning at all. You will get like zero learning like after a few layers. In order to deal with that, rectifier linear will solve the problem by just taking from 0 to infinity, and Laith also taking from -1. So will help in terms of avoiding the vanish problem. So Rolo, one of the good techniques, and most of the recent models use rectifier linear unit to deal with that. Again, there is a downside of Rolo, which is required high computational tools in order to train them. However, with sigmoid and tan edge, it's not that high, not high computational to deal with these two activation functions. But again, it's based on the task you work on the depth of the model that you use. One of the applications that we worked on, like around 2018, is we designed that model based on what we mentioned, and on task of DFU, diabetic foot ulcer. These are some of the features that we extracted and show how good to extract the features from the first layer. first convolutional layer, and we got the results that is really good, 95 precision and a 94 F-score. And we compared at that time with the state of the art, and we got better than the state of the art. We did the same structure that we just talked about, the power convolution, the type of activation function, and different solutions with the breast cancer. And we used this type of models at that time. And with these are type of features that the model just extracted, and showing how good in feature extraction. And we got, again, good results on 93 compared to the all previous results at that time. However, still not that high, like 93 is good, but still the training data is small to train that very deep models. So in order to have good performance, you need to deal with data as well. So these are the problem of the structure of the design. By themselves are not enough to deal with the problem. So in order to have a full image or full kind of workflow in order to improve the performance, you need to work on both of them, the training data and the structure as well. That leads us to the second research question, how to address lack of training data. This is the most annoying one, is to have the data set. The good thing about deep learning, more data to give more improvement in performance compared to the old learning algorithms that they get to the point of saturation. There is no improvement in terms of learning, even when you increase the data set. However, more data to feed the deep learning more is good. So it's hard to collect more data sets with the medical images, especially these medical images require manual labeling, require special devices like to get that image, for example, MRI or CT or so on, and required like an expert, not only a normal person to label that images, like compared to other tasks, like for example, you are going to classify cat versus dog, that's enough to label it by yourself. However, with medical images, you need people who are really good and expert in the area in order to label that image. So one of the good techniques to deal with that, something called transfer learning. So transfer learning is similar way of, for example, you know how to play violin, you just take that experience and movement and you improve that experience to work on piano, for example. Imagine you drive a small car, you know how to drive the small car, you need to move to the big car, the truck, you know how to drive, you train yourself a little bit, then you go to drive the big car. So the same thing here, like by learning from large data set, you transfer the learning to small data set. So this learning will help you in that small data set. So that's based on, they said, like the first and second levels of layers will learn just the features. So it could be from any source of images. So that will help. But however, the last level will learn the specific features. So if I teach the first layers from similar images, then definitely then the small data set I have, I can just train the model to learn for the specific object. I don't need to go through all of that. So this kind of workflow of transfer learning on the task, removing the last layer, adding the new layer to train on target data set, and then train the model and deploy it. So one of the good techniques of, one of the types of transfer learning is to transfer from ImageNet, the data set that we mentioned at the beginning. So several papers use that technique to transfer the features from ImageNet of these models like ResNet, GoogleNet, all these type of models and libraries to transfer from this data set to target data set. So imagine this scenario where we have a task to classify cat versus dog. So there is a similar features between this task and this data set. And then by doing that, the model already learned some of the features from that data set and then moved to train on the target data set and do the classification. which showed huge performance, a huge improvement in performance in order to deal with the lack of training data. So with medical images, again, we mentioned that these medical images require like collection and annotation expert in order to deal with that. So starting people to use the same concept for medical images, like using ImageNet in order to improve the performance of medical images and deal with the lack of training data. So that can help a little bit until for specific task. However, imagine this scenario where we have this ImageNet in the middle. You can transfer to the similar images with the natural images. There is a common features between these. However, with medical images, there is no any common or relevant features between two of these. Several papers starting to investigate that, the benefit of ImageNet for medical images, and they come up with a solution or with a conclusion that cannot help, especially for grayscale medical images. So these features are grayscale features, these are color features. There is no way to learn from them or to help with them. How to solve the problem? As a part of my PhD, I did investigation on that. I come up with a conclusion that these models cannot help. So I come up with the first type of transfer learning. In order to do transfer learning from ImageNet, you can use your own transfer learning. So imagine the scenario where we have a healthy and COVID. So there is no large data, like number of data set when COVID started. So like around imagine the scenario, there is 200 by 200 cases for each class. There is no way to train the deep learning with a small amount of data set. Even if you get high performance, definitely the model is experiencing overfitting. If you move on to the different data set for COVID and healthy, definitely you will face the overfitting problem. So what we did, we started by training the model on same domain transfer learning with the same environment. So we have a large data set of pneumonia, different type of X-ray, like a huge number of X-ray, like around 250,000 images of a chest X-ray. We first trained the model on that. Then we did the transfer learning on the target data set. We compared between from scratch training on the target data set with the proposed transfer learning, and we came up with the conclusion and with the results that showed a huge improvement in terms of performance and generalization by testing on different data sets later on. We found that the model of training from scratch just showed bad results on different data set. However, this one with the transfer learning showed good performance, good results when we tested on different data sets. Not only that, we found out later on, even with the color images of medical images, if you choose ImageNet from environment to the medical data set can affect the performance. However, if you use similar task, for example, DFU with wanted, and then there is improvement in terms of results, even with the color images. So the source of a transfer learning is really important. So for example, we use that by transferring from ImageNet, we got this result, dataset 1 and dataset 2. This one, dataset 1 and dataset 2, if the source of this one from here, or the source from here, and the same thing for that dataset, if the source from medical or from same domain. The purpose of a study to show that even with the color images, if you pick the source of transfer learning from same domain, it's better having like large amount of data from different domains. And showing here by just choosing the data set A with the medical one from the source of medical transfer learning got 97%. However, it got already scenario where we train from the ImageNet. So that showed that again, even we compared to two models, VGG19 at that time and ResNet, And both these models showed less performance, which both of them trained on 14 million images, less performance than the model that we proposed by training on the source that similar data, similar domain. Another way of transfer learning did with the skin cancer by just collecting unlabeled skin cancer, because the purpose of transfer learning is just to get the features. Then we collect large amount of unlabeled skin cancer. We trained the model, we did fine tuning, then we train on the target data set, and then after that we compare that results. So we did that by collecting 100,000 images of skin cancer unlabeled. We don't need to label them. Then after that, we fine-tuned that model on 18,000 images of skin cancer. We did the same procedure with less amount of training data with breast cancer. Also, the source was histology images, 200,000 images. These are some of the features that the model extract. Showing here that when we use the target data set, like from Scratch, 989, however, with the proposed transfer learning, we got 98% accuracy F-score by using the proposed transfer learning. Later on, we tested both models that trained from Scratch. That model, when tested on different data set, got bad results, because even with the 89%, still not generalized very well. However, the 98% got really good performance on unseen data set. Not only that, we used the same model that trained on breast cancer for different tasks by also collecting similar for the diabetic foot ulcer. We call it double transfer learning. That skin cancer model, we fine-tuned that model on unlabeled fit images, then for the target data set. So in order to improve the features a little bit, and then on the small amount of labeled. The purpose is to reduce the need of label, and then at the end will reduce the need of expert to spend long time. Again, the third that proposed showed 99% and generalized very well by showing that these are the features that the model extracted from the first layer. And this is an example that I kept this example in order to show later on that model tested on unseen DFU dataset from different environments, from different country. The data set were provided by Louisiana State University of Health Science, and we got, without training on that dataset just for testing, we got 97 accuracy, 93 precision, and 100, accuracy of 97, recall of 93, precision of 100, and score of F-score of 96, which shows really good performance on unseen. In this way, that showed that the model generalized very well and able, not experiencing any overfitting. We tested that concept of transfer learning, several types of transfer learning on different tasks. We tested on red blood cells to detect sickle cells anemia. We did the same thing. We got the same source domain from white blood cells to the red blood cells. We tested that on different data sets. We extract the features and the prediction. Later on, several papers starting to do the same thing. And for example, this paper just improved the source of transfer learning is important to be in the domain, and showing that if you take the natural images from these natural data sets and do the transfer learning from ImageNet, there is improvement in performance. However, if you use the grayscale image, for example, COVID, there is a drop in performance compared to these data sets. So it's important to have the source of transfer learning. Later on, I proposed a model called ImageNet, which I aim to have a model that will train on huge amount of data, of grayscale data. Then the people will, researchers, the community will start to fine tune that model for their task. There is no need to train on large data set. However, I haven't implemented, just proposed something due to the high computational tools. Like I'm aiming to train that model on like 3 million images publicly available, and the same thing with two version and the color one. Then that will help a similar way of ImageNet to have a model that train on a huge medical data set. From that time, I proposed that and published it online as a proposal. I keep receiving emails asking for that ImageNet, which I haven't implemented yet. The same concept that we proposed by using the same domain or from large data set or double transfer learning stuff, many papers just use the same technique for different tasks like CT, and they showed a huge improvement in performance, significant improvement. And another paper, even they used for agriculture, and they found out that it's better having same domain transfer learning than transfer from ImageNet. Lately, the founder of deep learning, Jeffrey Hinton, just released a paper with the Google research group on improving and showing that self-supervised, which is from the same domain, is better having the ImageNet for grayscale medical images. This guy is the founder of deep learning and godfather of deep learning, and even just pointed out to two of our papers that mentioning that this is type of transfer learning tools for deep learning. Transfer learning is able to deal with any type of these. You can just use transfer learning in classification or even segmentation, detection, and so on. Once we learn the features, we are able to use them. Whether it's a classification or segmentation, any type of medical or any type of application, you can just implement the transfer learning. But the point is how to like train on large or similar source of a transfer learning. The point is nowadays, I believe like moving from big data, more big label data to the small amount of good data, like having small amount of training data, like small amount, then you can use definitely transfer learning in order to deal with that small amount of data. Another solution to deal with the lack of training data is generative adversarial network, is GANs. There are several types of GAN purposes to use that GAN. The simple way is basically to train from real samples, and there is a discriminator to say whether it's real or not, or if it's matches with the real samples, just return and until to come up with the new sample. Let's imagine the scenario: we have the 3 input images. The network will get the features from them and build a new image that's not similar to these images. This kind of technique helps in terms of generate more data to train the deep learning models. Also, one of the types of GANs is to convert, for example, from satellite to map, or winter to summer, or horse to zebra, or orange to apple. Just an example to show how to modify from like one sample to another. Also, GAN used for unbalanced data set. For example, by just, for example, imagine the scenario where we have high number of normal class and small number of abnormal class. I don't recommend that you train any deep learning model with unbalanced data. Definitely, there is a problem with that, unless you evaluated on different evaluation metrics than the accuracy and precision and score. But you need to think of way how to balance your data before you train any deep learning model, because the model definitely will overfit on one of these classes. So GAN can just convert from, for example, normal to abnormal or abnormal to normal to generate more samples. Another technique called SMOTE that help also to generate more data. There are several algorithms, and this one just released in 2022, comparing with the GAN, different type of GANs, and they proposed, that paper proposed that they are able to generate good images compared to the GAN from the existing images. There is no need to high number, maybe 100 can generate another 100 of images. Last but not least, one of the good ideas for medical images, which I believe is fusion. Fusion is a good technique to give robust decision. For example, could be same source. You can use several algorithms, then you fuse them in the one decision, or maybe the task that where you have different type of data, and then you can just basically do a fusion on that by, for example, work on signals, come up with the classification, or work on MRI and come up with the classification, and then text data, numeric data, whatever you have, and then come up with the three decision and do fusion here, different ways of fusion, and come up with the final decision. So the decision will based on different types of input for one task. Or maybe you have an MRI, you can just use that input image with different algorithms and then fuse them in one final decision. That's a good way to give robustness to the decision, in order like one problem, that three opinion on the same problem is better having one opinion, in my opinion. Or even you can just do something called weighting. If you always find this one is the most robust one, you can give like 90% of the decision or 70% of the decision on one and 20%, which can reduce the error somehow. Another type of fusion called the future fusion. You use deep learning models, you fuse the features that extracted by these models, and you feed it to the machine learning classifier like SVM, Naive Bayes, K-nearest neighbor, and so on. That can help in terms of extract different features from different models to train these classifiers. Another type of called image fusion, where you do, for example, segmentation or localization or detection, and from different algorithms, and you fuse them in one output image. Could be some of them, not all of them perfect. However, when you combine them, you get a good image, as you see here. Last but not least, again, the final thing I would recommend with medical images is deep learning explainability. You need to explain. There are several tools, ways, and you can come up with a new way to explain how the performance. Usually people think or say deep learning is a black box. We don't know exactly what's going on inside. So this is an example showing that where the radiologists and the clinicians look at in order to make the decision. For example, on other hand, there is of showing the testing samples where the neural network is looking to make this decision. So that's really important part in every single application of deep learning. If both of them, the specialist, the expert, and the deep learning models looking at the same place, then the model's working really good. Sometimes by doing that, you will figure out the problem. Like imagine the scenario with whereas a dog with the red background and a cat with white background, and the model just looking at the background and will specify that the red color is the dog and the white color is the cat, and you will get high performance. That's really great, and you move on. If that background later on changed, the model will give bad performance. So by doing the visualization or that type of tools, you know exactly where the model is looking. Did the model extract the right features in order to make the decision?
Hi there, Laith. We're running a little bit low on time now. So you're just wrapping up now?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah, so the final thing, we went through different topics like the transfer learning and data augmentation and even the design. I would recommend for the future, like to dive in transfer learning. You don't need to prepare high amount of data. Maybe small amount of data with the transfer learning will show good performance. And thank you so much. And sorry for taking that long.
No, it's okay. Thanks, Laith. That was a really interesting presentation. So I think we can just sort of dive straight into the questions now. So one of the questions is, for large data sets, how is the class label attached to each image?
For that, definitely for the target data, for any data set, there is a label for a bunch of images. You don't need to go through one by one. For example, imagine different scenarios of dogs, then all of them are dogs. So a whole folder with a million of images, you just assign it a label of dogs. That's all we need. For medical images, for example, normal, abnormal, there is one folder of normal, one folder of abnormal. You don't need to go through one by one and assign the label. Once you upload these two folders to the deep learning model, will recognize that whatever in that part or that group will be normal, whatever in that part will be abnormal. So we don't need to go through each of these images in order to assign the label.
Yeah, thanks, Laith. That definitely makes sense. So the next question is it possible that images may belong to more than one class? So for example, in an X-ray, it may show cancer and a fracture. Is that possible?
Is it possible if the labeling stage is wrong? That's why we say that we need an expert to confirm the right label for each class. If you give bad class or bad label, I mean wrong label, definitely the model will learn that as a wrong one. Usually the labeling should be done by an expert to make sure this belongs to the right ones, this belongs to the like normal and abnormal. Usually they say if you give the model trash in, trash out. If you give bad label, definitely you get bad performance based on that. Some of the like examples that I experienced, we do usually, like if we have similar stage, we are not sure if that image will belong to any class, we do something called suspected. We do 100%, for example, normal, 100% abnormal. If there's something in between, we do another class called suspected, which is like kind of could be normal, could be abnormal, which is sometimes even hard for the people who are specialists to classify them. Then definitely the model is not able to classify them in the right way.
Excellent. So I just want to see if I can fit in a quick question. So I was sort of interested in the transfer learning material. So is there any situations where you might get worse performance with transfer learning? So for example, if the source data was too different to the target data, that you end up getting a worse performance? And if so, is there any ways to sort of overcome that?
So one of the scenarios like we experienced that training from scratch is similar to the training from having the transfer learning from different domain, or sometimes even worse. And there is a paper just published by Google. They showed that a shallow model trained from scratch on medical images gives exactly a little bit better than these pre-trained models of ImageNet that train on different domains. So that's one of the scenarios that I experienced. If you don't have the source of similar source, I would maybe try to train from scratch. And these models were trained, that pre-trained model of ImageNet, were trained to classify 1,000 images, 1,000 class with 14 million images. So they were designed for a specific task. However, for medical images, sometimes we don't need to take that very deep models. Sometimes a shallow model can help with a few samples of transfer learning from same domain, definitely would help. Even with a little bit of a cross domain, we have used, for example, white blood cells to prove the performance of red blood cells. At least they share something, at least they share some of the ideas or some of the features between two tasks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Laith. So we're out of time now, so let's bring the session to a close. So thanks very much again, Laith, for the very interesting presentation. And thanks very much, everyone, for joining. Hope to see you next time, and bye for now.
Thank you.